The sterile hum of the hospital room was a relentless drone, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to mock the stillness of the woman lying in the bed. Her name was Evelyn Harper, a name that once commanded boardrooms and lit up headlines, now reduced to a whisper among the nurses who tended to her lifeless form. For 6 months she had been a ghost in her own body, a millionaire heiress trapped in a coma, her once vibrant eyes closed to the world. The machines beeped, the IV dripped, and the world outside moved on without her. But in that quiet room, on a rainy October evening, a young doctor named Elias Carter stood over her, his hands trembling as he unraveled a fresh bandage. He was new, barely a month into his residency, and this was his first time tending to Evelyn. His heart pounded, not just from the weight of his inexperience, but from a strange, inexplicable pull he felt toward her. Little did he know, as he gently wrapped the bandage around her delicate wrist, that this moment would unravel a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. If you believe in the power of kindness, second chances, and the miracles that can happen in the quietest moments, please hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support keeps these stories alive, and together we can spread a little more hope in the world. Elias Carter was no stranger to doubt. At 27, he was the youngest resident in the neurology wing of St. Augustine's Hospital, a sprawling, aging facility in the heart of Boston. He'd grown up in a small town in Maine, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner to keep him in school. Medicine had been his dream since he was a boy, watching his mother stitch up her own cuts after long nights, too stubborn to see a doctor herself. But dreams, Elias learned, came with a cost. Medical school had left him drowning in debt, and the grueling hours of residency chipped away at his confidence. He was brilliant, his professors had said so, but brilliance meant little when his hands shook during rounds. When senior doctors barked orders, or when he lay awake at night, haunted by the faces of patients he couldn't save. Evelyn Harper was just another name on his chart, another task in a long shift. But something about her file struck him. She was 42, a self-made real estate tycoon who'd built an empire from nothing, only to collapse at a gala 6 months ago, struck down by a sudden brain aneurysm. The tabloids had feasted on the story, millionaire mogul felled by fate. But to Elias, she wasn't a headline. She was a mystery, a woman whose life hung in the balance, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to be here, in this moment with her. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of monitors and a sliver of gray light seeping through the rain-streaked window. Elias worked carefully, his fingers brushing against Evelyn's cool skin as he changed the bandage on her wrist, where an IV had left a small bruise. He'd read her chart a dozen times. Stable, but no signs of recovery. Her family, a distant cousin and a team of lawyers, visited rarely, more concerned with her estate than her condition. The nurses whispered about her in the break room, some with pity, others with a hint of resentment. She had everything, one said. Money, power, beauty, and now look at her. Elias hated those words. To him, Evelyn wasn't a fallen titan or a cautionary tale. She was a patient, a person, someone who deserved care, not judgment. As he secured the bandage, he spoke softly, though he knew she couldn't hear. "You're still in there, aren't you?" he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. It was a habit he'd picked up, talking to comatose patients, a way to anchor himself in the face of their silence. But as he adjusted the bandage, something happened. A flicker, so faint he thought he'd imagined it. Evelyn's finger twitched against his hand. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. He stared at her hand, waiting, willing it to move again. Nothing. The room was silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. He shook his head, chastising himself. "Wishful thinking, Carter," he muttered. He'd read about phantom movements in comatose patients, reflexes, not miracles. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like a crack in a frozen lake. He finished his task, checked her vitals, and left the room. But the moment stayed with him, a splinter in his mind. Over the next few days, he found himself drawn back to Evelyn's room, volunteering for extra shifts, lingering longer than necessary. He told himself it was diligence, but deep down, he knew it was something else. He began to notice details about her, the faint scar above her eyebrow, the way her dark hair fanned across the pillow, the delicate gold bracelet on her wrist, engraved with the word hope. He wondered who she'd been before the coma. What kind of woman could build an empire yet wear a bracelet with such a simple, tender word? The hospital was a pressure cooker and Elias was barely keeping up. His attending physician, Dr. Margaret Voss, was a formidable woman with a reputation for breaking residents. She'd taken a particular interest in Elias, not because of his potential, but because she sensed his insecurity. "You're too soft, Carter," she'd said during rounds, her voice cutting like a scalpel. "This job isn't about feelings. It's about precision." Her words stung, but Elias couldn't argue. He second-guessed every decision, triple-checked every chart, terrified of making a mistake. His colleagues, a mix of ambitious residents and jaded veterans, offered little camaraderie. He felt alone, an outsider in a world that demanded perfection. Evelyn's room became his refuge, a place where he could be still, where the weight of his failures didn't feel so crushing. He began to talk to her more, sharing fragments of his life, his mother's laugh, the way the Maine coast looked at dawn, the fear that he'd never be good enough. It was foolish, he knew, but it felt like a confession, a way to unburden his soul. Weeks passed, and the hospital settled into its rhythm of chaos and routine. Elias's obsession with Evelyn grew, though he'd never admit it. He studied her chart obsessively, scouring medical journals for new treatments, experimental therapies, anything that might spark a breakthrough. He proposed ideas to Dr. Voss, adjusting her medications, trying sensory stimulation, but she dismissed him with a wave of her hand. "She's a lost cause, Carter. Focus on patients you can actually save." The words hit him like a blow, but he didn't stop. He began spending his breaks in Evelyn's room, reading to her from books he found in the hospital library. Poetry, mostly, because it felt like something she might have loved. One evening, as he read a line from Whitman, "And your very flesh shall be a great poem," he saw it again, a twitch, this time in her eyelid. His heart raced. He called a nurse, then another, but by the time they arrived, Evelyn was still again, her face serene. The nurses exchanged glances, their skepticism palpable. "You're seeing what you want to see," one said gently. But Elias wasn't so sure. The turning point came on a stormy night in November, when the hospital was understaffed and overstretched. Elias was nearing the end of a double shift, his eyes burning with exhaustion, when an alarm blared from Evelyn's room. He sprinted down the hall, his heart in his throat, expecting the worst. But when he reached her, she wasn't crashing. She was awake. Her eyes, a deep hazel, were open, staring at the ceiling, wide with confusion and fear. Elias stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the impossible. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice trembling. She turned her head slowly, her gaze locking onto his. For a moment the world stopped, the rain, the alarms, the chaos of the hospital. There was only Evelyn, alive, awake, and looking at him like he was the only thing anchoring her to reality. The nurses rushed in, followed by Dr. Voss, and the room erupted into controlled chaos. Vitals checked, tests ordered, voices overlapping. But Elias couldn't move. He stood by her side, his hand brushing hers, and when her fingers curled weakly around his, he felt a surge of something he couldn't name. Hope, purpose, maybe even destiny. Evelyn's recovery was slow, fraught with setbacks. She couldn't speak at first, her body weak from months of immobility. The hospital buzzed with the news, a miracle they called it, though Dr. Voss insisted it was just biology catching up. Elias didn't care about the why. He cared about Evelyn, who was no longer a chart or a mystery, but a woman fighting to reclaim her life. He visited her daily, helping with her physical therapy, coaxing her through exercises when she grew frustrated. She was stubborn, sharp-tongued even in her frailty, and he admired her fire. She told him fragments of her story, a childhood in foster care, a relentless drive to prove herself, a life built on ambition but haunted by loneliness. "I thought money would fix everything," she said one day, her voice hoarse. But it just made the emptiness louder. Elias listened, his heart aching for her. He saw himself in her struggle, the way they both carried wounds they didn't show the world. Their bond grew, quiet but unshakable. Elias found himself changing too. He stood taller during rounds, spoke up when Dr. Voss challenged him, trusted his instincts. Evelyn's awakening had awakened something in him, a belief that he could make a difference, that he wasn't just a cog in the hospital's machine. But the road wasn't easy. Evelyn's family descended, a flurry of lawyers and relatives who saw her recovery as a threat to their control over her estate. They questioned Elias's involvement, accused him of overstepping. "Evie,